Imagine a newborn baby. She's wrapped in this really thin cloth and just left on a freezing, completely isolated mountainside to die, to literally die of cold and starvation.
Right. And, I mean, the reason for this is just wild.
Yeah, it is. Her father was simply disappointed she wasn't born a boy.
Which, sets up this incredible story.
Exactly, because now imagine that same discarded child surviving against all odds and growing up to physically overpower, outrun, and outhunt the greatest male heroes in all of history.
It's just the absolute antithesis of the classic hero's journey. I mean, there is no grand prophecy here.
Right.
There's no royal birthright being reclaimed, no magical sword handed over by the gods to guarantee success. The universe didn't weave a grand destiny for her. It essentially threw her out with the morning trash.
It really did. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are going on a mission to uncover one of the most unapologetic, expectation-defying figures of ancient myth. We are talking about Atalanta.
Yes, Atalanta. And we're pulling our insights primarily from Edith Hamilton's brilliant synthesis of the ancient texts.
Right. And for you listening, this is a story about what happens when undeniable raw competence collides with deeply entrenched prejudice. It's about someone who completely refuses the narrative she was handed.
And while the sources we are analyzing are thousands of years old, that specific friction being overly qualified in a world that actively resents your presence, it feels incredibly modern.
Oh, totally. But right from the jump, we do have to talk about how this myth was pieced together, because there's this whole two Atalantis theory floating around in the old texts.
Yeah, that historiographical headache.
Exactly. Some sources say her father was a king named Isis in Arcadia, but then other sources claim her father was Skenius in Boeotia. So for a long time, classical scholars thought, well, maybe there were two different women.
Right, because ancient storytellers often swapped out the names of unimportant background characters like fathers, depending on what region the story was being told in.
Okay, let's unpack this quirk in the source material. How do we know which one is real, or if they both are?
Well, Hamilton cuts through the noise and synthesizes this perfectly. She points out that if there were two Atalantas, we are supposed to believe that there were two completely distinct women living at the exact same time,
Right.
who both wanted to sail on the Argo, both fought the Calydonian Boar, both married a man who beat them in a foot race, and both ultimately suffered the same bizarre fate of being turned into lionesses by the gods.
Okay, yeah. Even by ancient myth standards, that is way too much of a coincidence.
Precisely. As the source concludes, it's simply too improbable. I mean, the idea of two maidens at the exact same time, out shooting, outrunning, and out-wrestling the men of the heroic age, it just defies logic.
So there was only one Atalanta.
There was only one, and her singular origin story is what really sets the psychological foundation for everything she does later.
So let's get into that brutal origin. Her father's expecting a male heir. He gets Atalanta. He is so bitterly disappointed that he decides she just isn't worth bringing up. So he leaves a helpless baby on a wild mountainside. I mean, why was this just allowed?
We have to understand the brutal reality of the ancient world. The practice is called infant exposure.
Infant exposure.
Yeah, it wasn't just a mythological trope, it was a real socioeconomic mechanism in antiquity. If a child was deformed, or if a family couldn't afford another mouth to feed, or, and this was very often the case, if the child was a girl and the father wanted a male heir.
Because of the family name and dowries and all that.
Exactly. To carry on the name and avoid paying a future dowry, they would literally expose the infant to the elements. It was a way of killing the child without technically spilling their blood.
Wow. So they found a loophole.
Right, which kept the parents free from the spiritual pollution of murder.
That is incredibly dark. But, nature steps in where humanity fails. The text specifically notes that a she-bear, proving to be kinder than human beings, finds the baby.
A literal bear.
A literal bear. The bear takes charge of her, nurses her, and keeps her warm. So Atalanta grows up as this active, daring little girl in the total wilderness, until eventually some kind hunters find her and take her in.
And because she's Atalanta, she doesn't just learn to hunt alongside them.
No, she becomes more than their equal in all the arduous, back-breaking feats of a hunter's life. It's like the ultimate wilderness survival reality show.
It really is. The wilderness essentially stripped away all the societal conditioning that would have told a young Greek girl she was supposed to be quiet, indoors, and subservient. She was forged by the absolute harshness of nature.
I hear that, but I want to push back on this a little bit. Does this isolated survivalist upbringing fully explain why she is so utterly fearless later on? Because learning to track a deer is one thing, But what she does next goes way beyond just survival skills.
You're talking about the centaur incident.
Yes, the centaur incident. Let's set that scene. Two centaurs catch fight of her while she's entirely alone in the woods. Now, for anyone rusty on their mythology, centaurs aren't just half-horse, half-man hybrids.
Oh, they are terrifying.
They are swifter and stronger by far than any mortal. They are violent forces of nature. They pursue her. And a normal person, even a highly trained warrior, would probably panic.
Oh, absolutely. The source specifically notes that running would have been absolute folly. You cannot outrun a centaur in the open woods.
Right. But Atalanta doesn't run.
Yeah?
She doesn't scream for the hunters to come save her. She calmly stands perfectly still. She fits an arrow to her bow. She shoots.
Yeah, like that.
Just like that. She fits a second arrow and shoots again. Both centaurs fall, mortally wounded. It's almost surgical.
What's fascinating here is how this single violent encounter completely short-circuits the traditional damsel in distress narrative before her larger story even really begins.
Oh, entirely.
She doesn't need a Perseus or a Theseus to swoop in at the last second. She is her own rescue party. It proves that her absolute self-reliance isn't just about wilderness survival. It's about a profound internal stillness.
Yeah, that internal stillness. Her absolute self-reliance works perfectly in isolation. But the real test is what happens when that unapologetic independence collides with the ultimate ancient Greek boys' club.
The Calydonian Boar Hunt.
Exactly. Which brings us to the Calydonian Boar Hunt. We have to understand the catalyst here. King Oeneus of Calydon makes a massive unforced error. He's sacrificing the first fruits of the harvest to the gods, and he forgets Artemis.
And in Greek myth, forgetting a god isn't a minor social faux pas, it is an act of hubris, extreme arrogant pride that offends the divine order.
Especially Artemis.
Right. Artemis is the goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, and wild animals. You do not want to slight her.
Never. So Artemis is furious, and she sends a terrible, monstrous creature, the Calydonian boar, to ravage the country. This brute is devastating the land, destroying cattle, and literally slaughtering the men who try to stop it.
It's a national emergency.
Full panic mode. King Oeneus sends out a call for the bravest men in all of Greece. A splendid band of young heroes assembles. We're talking the absolute elite, many of whom later sail on the Argo.
This is the ancient Greek equivalent of an all-star team. The greatest warriors of their generation gathering for the ultimate hunt.
Exactly. And walking right into the middle of this testosterone-fueled gathering is Atalanta. The Force calls her the pride of the woods of Arcady.
And, how exactly do we know what her entrance looked like? Because there's a really interesting quirk in the source material here.
Yes, we rely heavily on two main writers for her full story. Apollodorus, who wrote around the 1st or 2nd century A.D., and Ovid. And when we're trying to figure out who Atalanta really was, balancing these two is crucial.
Apollodorus is your reliable, if slightly dry, reporter.
Right, he gives you the raw facts. Ovid, on the other hand, is the Hollywood director of the ancient world. He loves exaggeration and cinematic flair. So Hamilton beautifully synthesizes Ovid's vivid imagery with Apollodorus's grounded reality.
Which means we get a highly detailed, very visual description of her stepping into this camp.
We do. She has a shining buckle clasping her robe at the neck. Her hair is simply dressed, just caught up in a knot behind. She has an ivory quiver on her left shoulder, a bow in her hand.
It's such a clear image.
And her face. I absolutely love this line from the translation. It says, "It seemed too maidenly to be that of a boy, and too boyish to be that of a maiden."
It's a striking image because it is purely functional. She completely rejects the hypermasculine, heavily armored look of the heroes, but she also refuses the ornamental, delicate aesthetic that was entirely expected of women at the time. She is just her own category.
And that aesthetic is very captivating to at least one guy in the room. Meleager, the son of King Oeneus. He takes one look at her and falls hopelessly in love at first sight. He thinks she is lovelier and more desirable than any maiden he's ever seen.
But Atalanta
treats him like a good comrade, a hunting buddy. She has zero interest in men except as companions in the hunt, and she is absolutely determined never to marry.
Her mere presence, however, is a massive disruption to the social order of this camp. Many of these heroes deeply resent her being there.
Oh, yeah.
They feel their honor is stained by having to share a battlefield with a woman.
Their egos are so incredibly bruised. But Meleager insists, and because he's the king's son, they finally cave. And honestly, it's a good thing they did, because once they actually surround this monstrous boar, absolute chaos breaks out.
It was total panic.
The boar rushes them so fast it kills 2 men right out of the gate, and then, in the blind panic of the ambush, a 3rd man falls, pierced by a misdirected javelin from one of his own guys.
3 of the greatest heroes in Greece are dead before they've even landed a single blow. It is an unmitigated disaster.
It really is. In this total confusion of dying men, thrashing tusks, and wildly flying weapons, these elite warriors are losing their minds. But Atalanta keeps her head.
She stays perfectly calm.
She draws her bow, and her arrow is the first to strike and win the boar.
And that first blood is crucial. It breaks the boar's momentum. It proves the monster is mortal. Meleager is then able to rush in and stab the wounded creature in the heart. So technically speaking, Meleager lands the killing blow. But he recognizes that the true honors of the hunt belong to Atalanta, and he insists on giving her the skin as the ultimate prize.
You know, think about a time you had to prove yourself in a room full of people who actively didn't want you there. Now imagine doing it while they're panicking and throwing deadly weapons at each other. She outperforms the greatest heroes of her age, saving their lives in the process.
But tragically, in this society, a woman demonstrating superior competence isn't met with gratitude. It is treated as a profound insult.
Which brings us to the immediate disastrous aftermath. Because Meleager's uncles, his mother's brothers, are furiously angry. They feel personally humiliated that the prize of the greatest hunt in their lifetime went to a girl.
The older translations have them calling her a shameless hussy for having the audacity to hunt alongside men.
Yes, a shameless hussy. They declare that Meleager had no right to give the skin away. And Meleager, fiercely defending Atalanta and his own decision, draws his weapon. He takes his uncles completely off guard and kills them both.
The violence escalates at a terrifying speed. But to understand the true weight of this family tragedy, we have to talk about the magical context of Meleager's life.
Right, there's literally a magical ticking clock attached to his life.
Yes. When Meleager was just a week old, the Fates appeared to his mother, Althea. Now, the Fates, or the Moirai, are the absolute cosmic authority in Greek myth. They spin the thread of human life, and even Zeus fears them.
They are not to be messed with.
Exactly. They appeared in Althea's chamber, threw a log of wood into the burning fireplace, and sang a terrifying prophecy. They said, "To you, O newborn child, we grant a gift, to live until this wood turns into ash."
That's so eerie. His entire lifespan is bound to a single piece of firewood.
Althea immediately snatched that burning brand from the fire, stamped out the flame, and hid it in a heavy chest. For his entire life, she literally held her son's mortality under lock and key.
But then Althea gets the news from the hunt. Her beloved brothers have been slaughtered by her own son. And why? Because he made a fool of himself over a girl. A dark passion of rage takes possession of her.
She just snaps.
She rushes to the chest, pulls out that unburned log, and throws it straight into the blazing fire. As the wood blazes up, far away in the camp, Meleager suddenly falls to the ground, dying from an invisible fire, consuming his insides.
Wow.
By the time the log is turned to ash, his spirit is gone. And Althea, suddenly horror-stricken by the reality of murdering her own son, hangs herself.
It is a breathtakingly rapid collapse of an entire royal dynasty.
It is. But here's where it gets really interesting. I have to ask you, is this Calydonian Boar Hunt actually Atalanta's victory? Because she wins the prize, yes.
Right.
But everyone around her dies. Is she just a catalyst, a prop for a story about male pride and familial tragedy?
That is the essential tension of the myth. But I would argue Atalanta doesn't cause the tragedy. She is simply the mirror reflecting the hero's fatal flaws.
I like that.
She arrives cool-headed, competent, and focused purely on the task. The men, however, are entirely undone by their own fragile egos, their jealousy, and their complete lack of emotional control.
That makes so much sense.
Society either tries to weaponize her competence for male glory, which Meleager tries to do by giving her the skin, or it destroys itself trying to reject it, like the uncles.
She's the only adult in the room. And after the dust settles, she just keeps moving forward alone. She starts building her solo legend. There are rumors she wanted to sail with Jason and the Argonauts, but Jason supposedly persuaded her not to.
Right.
Given that she isn't mentioned in their exploits, and knowing she'd never hold back if daring deeds were happening, the sources safely assume she didn't go. But she does show up later at the funeral games for Peleus.
Yes, Peleus, the king who was killed by the sorceress Medea. And we should clarify, ancient funeral games weren't somber affairs. They were massive, highly competitive athletic festivals where champions gathered to display their prowess and honor the dead.
And Atalanta enters the wrestling match. And who does she conquer? A young man named Peleus. For anyone who knows the Trojan War, Peleus is the future father of Achilles.
Achilles, the greatest warrior.
Yes. She wrestles the man who will father the greatest, most invincible Greek warrior of all time, and she pins him to the ground.
It permanently cements her status. She isn't just a deadly archer who can strike from a distance. She can physically overpower the greatest male athletes of her generation in brutal hand-to-hand combat.
And it's exactly after this monumental achievement that a deeply ironic reunion happens. She discovers who her birth parents are, and she goes to live with them. Her father, the same king who left her on a freezing mountain to die, is suddenly perfectly reconciled to having a daughter.
And why is that?
Because the source states she really seemed almost, if not quite as good as a son.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the hypocrisy here is staggering. Her father discarded her because she lacked inherent value in his eyes simply for being female.
Yeah.
He only accepts her back into the fold when she is perfectly assimilated into the violent, hyper-masculine ideal of success. She literally had to become the greatest man in Greece just to be granted the basic right to exist in her own father's house.
It's infuriating. But moving back in with Dad brings a brand new problem for her. Suitors. A ton of them. Which honestly seems odd. You'd think the men of that era would be terrified of a woman who could hunt, shoot, and wrestle better than them.
It's likely that she became the ultimate status symbol. In a society obsessed with dominance, what could bring more glory than taming the untamable woman?
Well, she has no intention of being tamed. She wants to reign unmarried and free in the woods. So she devises a lethal way to dispose of these suitors easily and agreeably.
Lethal being the key word.
Yes, very lethal. She declares she will only marry the man who can beat her in a foot race. And the unspoken rule here, which these myths always imply, is that the losers pay with their lives. She sets this up knowing absolutely no mortal man can outrun her.
It's an impossible test designed to protect her autonomy. Fleet-footed young men keep arriving, and she always outpaces them, until eventually one challenger arrives who realizes he can't win by physical prowess alone.
His name is Melanion, or Hippomenes, depending on the ancient translation. He watches her run and knows he isn't as fast as her. So he uses his head, and he seeks divine intervention. He prays to Aphrodite.
And we really need to examine why Aphrodite, the goddess of love, decides to intervene. Atalanta's fierce independence and her absolute rejection of marriage isn't just a personal choice in the eyes of the gods. It is almost an insult to Aphrodite's entire domain.
Aphrodite takes it personally.
Oh, very personally. The goddess is always on the lookout to subdue wild young maidens who despise love. Atalanta is committing hubris against Aphrodite just by existing independently.
So Aphrodite gives Melanion a gift. 3 wondrous apples. They are made of pure gold, as beautiful as the ones that grow in the mythical garden of the Hesperides.
And for context, the Garden of the Hesperides was a legendary, untouchable realm of the gods at the edge of the world. These apples aren't just shiny pieces of fruit. They possess a magical, divine allure. No mortal alive can look at them and not be overwhelmingly compelled to possess them.
Melanion hides these golden apples in his tunic and steps up to the starting line. And the source describes this final race beautifully. Atalanta is poised for the starting signal. She's disrobed for the race, looking 100-fold more lovely, and a rosy flush is tinging her fair body.
Everyone is just struck by her beauty.
Especially Melanion. But he keeps his head. The signal is given. They take off. She is flying swift as an arrow, hair tossed back over her shoulders, quickly outstripping him.
And that's when Melanion deploys his strategy. He rolls the first golden apple directly across her path.
It only takes a split second for her to stoop and pick up this impossibly lovely thing, but that brief pause brings him right abreast of her. A moment later, he throws the second apple, this time a little further to the side.
She swerves to reach it.
Yes, he takes the lead. But she is so insanely fast, she almost immediately catches up with him again. The finish line is incredibly close.
He has one apple left. He really has to make it count.
He throws the third golden sphere, and he throws it hard, far into the green grass beside the course. Atalanta sees the gleam of gold through the green. She simply cannot resist it.
The divine compulsion is too strong.
Exactly. She leaves the path entirely to pick it up. And as she does, Melanion, panting and almost winded, touches the goal. He crosses the finish line.
You know, think of Melanion not as a superior athlete, but as a hacker. Atalanta's mind and body are an impenetrable fortress, an uncrackable system. No man can beat her by playing the game fairly.
Right.
So Aphrodite hands Melanion the ultimate psychological zero-day exploit. It exploits a glitch in human nature to force a systemic failure.
That is exactly what it is. She wasn't beaten by a better runner. She was beaten by a rigged system. It's like being in the zone during a marathon, but someone keeps dropping $1 million winning lottery ticket just off the path. How could you not stop?
You'd have to stop.
I have to. And just like that, Her free days alone in the forest and her incredible athletic victories are over. She is forced to marry him.
It's a deeply tragic defeat. It perfectly illustrates how systems rewrite the rules when someone they deem unworthy starts winning too much.
It does. Now, to give you the full scope of her life, the sources do mention an epilogue. She later bore a son, Parthenopaeus, who grows up to become one of the famous seven against Thebes. But her story ends on a bizarre, punitive note. Eventually, Atalanta and her husband are turned into lions. Why did the gods do this?
Well, it was an act of divine retribution. The myth says they affronted either Zeus or Aphrodite, often by consummating their marriage inside a sacred temple. But the specific punishment of becoming lions is fascinating.
Why lions?
The ancient Greeks and Romans held a strange biological belief that lions could not mate with other lions. They believed lions could only mate with leopards.
Wait, really?
Yes. So by turning Atalanta and her husband into lions, the gods weren't just turning them into beasts, they were eternally separating them. It was the ultimate petty wrath, stripping away her humanity, her agency, and her connection all at once.
So what does this all mean when we look back at the whole scope of her life?
Atalanta was a hero who carved her own brilliant path through a world that literally left her to die in the cold. She beat the greatest men of her age at their own games, hunting, wrestling, running.
She proved them all wrong.
She proved that absolute world-class competence exists entirely outside of gender norms and societal expectations. Yet, in the end, she couldn't be beaten on a level playing field, so the rules had to be magically altered to subdue her.
And that's exactly why Atalanta's story isn't just ancient trivia. It's a testament to the power of unapologetic skill in the face of fragile egos. She demanded to be measured by her actions, not their expectations.
Which leaves you with an important question to consider in your own life. Atalanta could outrun any human alive, but she couldn't outrun the distraction of the golden apples. When you are racing toward your own ultimate goal, what are the golden apples being rolled across your path? What are those irresistible distractions perfectly designed to pull you off course? And are they really worth losing your freedom to pick up?
Especially when you realize you were the one meant to cross the finish line first all along.